WeWork and Liquid Space is a very good example of some of the impacts that technology is having on traditional workplace usage and practices. But beyond those companies, there's an even bigger impact happening inside the major corporations and employers in America. I see it myself from my perch as a strategy consultant at CBRE. Large corporations are looking to improve their efficiency, reduce their costs, create more engaging workplaces to attract the elusive millennial talent. Small companies are taking advantage of their agility and their flexibility to focus on things like culture and keeping a low-cost structure. But all of this revolution is facilitated by technology. The proliferation of broadband into the home and into remote locations, mobile, big data, and miniaturization. Our panel today is a group of experts that are on the front line of this revolution. Starting from left to right, the CEO and founder of Liquid Space, the largest commercial real estate network, Mark Galbraith. Robert Cow, the CEO of Valet Anywhere, the parking solution for people in urban centers. Next to him is the 2012 LinkedIn Next Wave. That's 150 people globally that were recognized by LinkedIn as those that are going to set the future. And also a 2012 Crain's 40 Under 40. Amanda Carroll of Gensler. The co-founder and CEO of Onyx Equities, my old job, Jonathan Schultz. And Melissa Marsh, the founder and CEO of Plastark, a consulting firm dedicated to increasing the desirability of space, which I think is a great concept. So there was a recent KPMG study that talked about how technology is going to change the way we think about real estate. And one of the statements that those guys made was that the technology in a building will govern how it's valued, right? Now that's a very provocative statement. And since Jonathan is the one who values buildings the most, maybe we could start with you and see how you react to that.
Well, thanks for having me. This is amazing. I can remember 5 years ago, where there may be 3-4 people in this room, and it's just a momentous thing to see that this is actually taking on, and it's going to be something I think we're going to all watch and look back and be just very excited that we're all part of it. So I'm glad to be here. But as a building owner, I feel there's two components, and one is like, will the building be more valuable? You know, I wish I could change markets that way and make a building more valuable because of technology. So in some respects, I think the transparency and maybe the understanding of the information will make people that can't enter a market, and when you have supply-demand economics happen, you get more money. But I think the bigger impact is on how we're going to run our businesses, deliver information, and deliver services to the tenants, which is our most valuable asset. And that's where the bonanza is going to come. You know, for me, we're in 11 states. We've had up to 60 million square feet of property that we had to manage through tenant relationships, people. And, you know, our business is completely siloed, as we all talk about. And technology, in a certain respect, has helped me grow organically and not completely lose my mind, because, you know.
Melissa,
yeah.
Would you respond to how a tenant might see technology as increasing value?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so really the occupant is looking for experience. That's what we heard from Mike Gross this morning. It's about wanting the experience first. It's less about ownership. It is about that curb to cube or that home to office. And so really the future is technology and the building working together to create value. And when we talk about that value changing, It's changing more quickly because the consumer is changing and because their visibility and their power is changing. Instead of one person making a decision for 1,000 people about their work environment, 1,000 people are each making those decisions. And so that's creating a very different landscape of what desirability means than ever before.
Amanda, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, to continue that point, I think even in the last 5 years, you've seen companies that historically had no sort of omnipresent strategy or omni-channel strategy becoming businesses that now represent themselves in a digital way and in a very big way have been doubling down on that from a workforce perspective, which means they're hyper aware of how that's affecting their bottom line. And when they translate that to real estate, they're looking for their real estate to operate in a way that's as responsive as their own platform. So the way that they run diagnostics, the way that they tinker with their own platform trying to accommodate their customers, they're expecting that sort of responsiveness within a built environment. And it's pervasive across more industries than people give credit. In New York proper, the high-tech workforce that is represented in this year, only 33% of those high-tech employees work for high-tech companies. So
I'm sorry, I didn't get what you just said. Could you just repeat that, please?
of all of the high-tech workers that are in Manhattan, in our market, only 33% of them work for the Googles or the Facebooks of the world.
Okay.
The 77% of them are they're the engines that are running the Goldman Sachs or the Hearst or the Condé, And so all of those people have preferences that are looking for that platform to be responsive.
I
Mark.
want to add to what Melissa was saying that, I think because it's not one person making a decision for 1,000, it's 1,000 people that are part of the decision-making process because everybody's got an internet-connected device called a smartphone. And I think really that's kind of the changing in terms of the shifting in the terms of power of people want that, whatever services they want in the building, they have a voice now, and the instant gratification of a lot of the services, whether it is, I need food to deliver to my building, whether it's office building or a residential building. I think that's really the underlying change. I think that's right.
Now, Mark, you are actually enabling buildings with technology, or enabling people to use buildings using technology. Maybe you could talk about your perspective on that.
Well, and you asked the question, does technology make a building more valuable?
Right.
And I'm an engineer, so I like technology. I kind of geek out on it. And if you went back in my history before Liquid Space, there was a period of time where I was a building owner developer. I built one building, and it was all geeked out. It was a LEED gold building with raised floor systems and IP-based lighting. It had all the candy in it, but it didn't make the building more valuable. So my answer would be no, tech doesn't make buildings more valuable.
Location does.
No, unfortunately, what's the value of a building? Well, it's whatever a stock investor will pay for a public REIT or whatever a buyer will pay for a building. And it's mostly based on cap rate, right? Which means revenue of the building, which means the first order opportunity for us with technology and just general operations is to fill the buildings more. They're friggin' empty, right? I mean, the structural vacancies, the underutilization, that's the problem. So how do you increase the economic occupancy of a building? That's the shot to the vein to increase the asset value, I would argue.
Now, Jonathan, does it always come back to NOI?
Absolutely. I mean, that's how we sell our buildings and that's how we monetize. But the only thing I think that will change is the new generation of workers and giving them all this voice, right? That you never had before, is changing the patterns of where it used to be like, where does the CEO live and what does the CEO want? And that's where they're going. And it's completely not that way anymore. So if your buildings are not outfitted or have the potential to be outfitted with all these things that you can finally see in front of your eyes or experience, it will hurt your value. Instead of getting a 6 cap, you'll get a 7 cap. I mean, it will, because they're going to worry about the long-term viability, and that's what you look for when you want to own an asset. You want to keep your tenants. It's the only thing that makes the NOI what the NOI should be.
Amanda, what are some of the things that Gensler is seeing in terms of the types of amenities and technologies that clients are specifying in new workplaces?
I think that the trend towards amenities, not to contradict what a lot of people have been talking about, which are about convenience amenities and lifestyle amenities, those those will continue to, become a even increasingly a larger part of our life. The bigger issues, and we work with clients like Etsy and Blue Apron and TED and Hulu and creative class organizations who are really a big part of the real estate market here. And their biggest stresses are around ability to grow in a way that's unpredictable. I think something like over 60% of companies that are making real estate decisions only look 3 years out or less. So for them, the big question mark, an amenity is actually flexibility to take down additional space in a way that's they don't have to commit to day one. Another thing we see is increasingly important is the network capability and also resilience. I mean, I think we keep having conversations, and some of the hottest areas where leasing activity is really hitting unprecedented numbers is in areas where there's flood zones, and there's a lot of concern around long-term strategies for ways that you can make sure that business is uninterrupted.
Melissa, I was really intrigued by the description on your website about making space desirable. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you do that to help people desire to be in a space?
Yeah, so our work is at the intersection of people analytics and building science. So we are really looking at what is the performance of the person, what is the ways that we can track or use self-tracking or self-quantification to participate in the understanding of the power and that voice of the building. So we're constantly looking for new ways to have a feedback mechanism between the occupants and the building itself, with a proposition that people will vote with their feet, that we will continue to see the high-value buildings as the places where people want to be and the low-value buildings as the places where people don't want to be, and these are reciprocal, so we'll really be seeing the occupancy as a measure of that building performance. Opening remarks from today in advancing the visual stimulation of this building, its accessibility, is about bringing people in and really looking at people as the measurement of a building and vice versa. And for us, the power of technology there is that when we start to operate the building with our mobile device, we then have exhaust data from that device, from that interaction of the customer, that's actually giving us building design information about how to change the building to better serve the occupant. So we're starting to have a feedback loop in real estate that is much like what we might have in consumer products and have never really had before in our industry. It's very exciting.
Mark, you probably get a lot of that exhaust data from your usage. Could you talk about some of the data that you get that might be different from what landlords or even tenants collect and how you use that?
Yeah, we had a press release this morning, in fact, where we mentioned that we've just settled rated internally our 2 millionth transaction. And so we've got a meaningful data set of people exercising what she spoke of, which is sort of choice. We're enabling flexible transactions to happen, whether it's by the hour or the day or the month or the year. And so if you want to know what the average meeting room size is in Midtown Manhattan, we probably have the best data set in the world for that. Now, why would that be relevant to a building owner or a tenant? Well, if I'm doing a fit out of an office, we probably have a data set that could give you good guidance on what the office space programming should be. If you're building a new building, we can probably provide pretty compelling data on what the layout for flexible space tenancy should be. And so, the data coming out of our marketplace actually has a number of future homes in terms of influencing design decisions.
Jonathan, you're more of a traditional landlord.
Right.
Could you talk a little
What's
bit
that
about
mean?
Could you talk
You wear a suit.
Could you talk a little bit about the data that you collect and stuff that you might not collect that you would find useful?
The newer technologies are actually allowing you to collect data like never before. So with us, it's tenant satisfaction, right? It's understanding, because all we can gauge is how we react to the needs of the tenant. So we've been personally more focused on, our KPIs, like how long does it take us to call back a tenant that has a light bulb out? And there's tracking systems and ability to do that today like you can never do before. It's like, the Domino's pizza, when you can order it up and finally watch it come, you're not stressed out about it coming because you know when. we need to create that same experience for tenants because all the consumer world has created an environment that we have to step up and be now. And business is always lagging, and real estate is way lagging compared to most industries.
So I mean like a tracking number
So I guess
for
that's
your
what you mean
pizza?
by traditional, right? Like the lagging indicator. But we're actually trying to do as much as we can with services, tracking, I guess people analytics, but based on how we perform. I think once you get that down, you know you're going to have your tenants, and then I think I'll have more of a luxury to do all this other great stuff to keep them in the building for the future, right? Which is important.
Go ahead, Amanda.
I think that responsiveness is one layer to it, but another key part is social responsibility. And real estate is entering a realm where there's awareness now as to what the footprint of real estate does to the planet and what, as individuals and occupants, we can be doing to do better. And a lot of what this measurement does is actually give people the ability to measure consumption. And that's really important to millennials. I'm a millennial. I care about understanding ways I can better or lower or compete with my colleagues to make my environment smarter, faster, have a lower demand on the overall plug load, or all of those different variables. So some of it is, I think, sort of speed to respond, and that's a service, right? But the other part is access to information so that I can make my own experience better. And I think a big part of it is giving the tenant the keys to say, do what you want, and I'm going to put you in the driver's seat.
Well, talking about putting people in the driver's seat, Robert, why don't you talk a little bit about your service and how you see it addressing some of the issues that Amanda just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when it comes to talk about commercial side of things, when people are trying to move into an office space, or even just, regular folks are trying to move into a new city and they have a car. Like in New York City, a lot of people that are moving into the city have a car, but they don't know what to do with it because parking is so expensive. They're just shocked. And I think, one example that we do is, we work with 111 Murray Street, where it's a flagship property for Fisher Brothers. And, a lot of time, we're not helping them selling a new unit, but we're making that parking conversation with consumers much easier. And so we're actually working with a couple other folks on the office side of things, where there's a company that wants to relocate into Manhattan, but a lot of their workers have cars. They don't know what to do with it. So I think that's really where I think we're much more closer to the consumer side, because that affects how people commute to work, how people use their car within a city like New York City. So
Yeah. Melissa, are you seeing sort of services like this, parking as a service, office as a service, everything else as a service in your research?
Yeah, I was going to jump in with that both on the amenity front as well as on the really changing and shifting what you might think of as the location landscape. So with Uber, an organization that might have been concerned about what time people are going to the office or coming from the office, or might be concerned about security of a neighborhood, they can make a completely different set of decisions now because they know that their staff can always call Uber. And so the same thing is happening even when you think of restaurants in an area. Now you've got Maple, you've got Seamless, and so you can pretty much from your desk or from your backpack or your phone figure out exactly the environment and the experience you want to have, and have that come to you. So that's really changing what we might have thought of as the traditional landscape of where property values are in the city. With the infrastructure coming in, of course, the data comes first, but then after that, the reasons why you would have gone to a certain neighborhood are really changing because these services can be brought into the area and brought into the building in completely different ways than ever before.
Right, and I want to just add to that too. So talk about value of properties. Obviously, I think in major city, in CBD areas, properties are always going to go up, and I think obviously location. But what we've been able to do is kind of take cars are typically would be charged $600 to $700 a month in parking, but we actually move it to where real estate value was, it's not very high, but over time we're bringing utilization to an area that's underutilized currently and really driving that up as well. So, Mark talked about before, it's value equates to occupancy, right? So we're actually making spaces more occupied. And for us, it's the basement that people built in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, in Long Island City that nobody's using, but now we're actually taking advantage of. So,
Mark, I'd like you to just address the issue that Melissa raised around people making different sorts of location decisions, right? And specifically, I want you to talk about the suburban-urban choice that a lot of people may be flipping around, and what you're seeing in your own experience.
What our marketplace data would say is, and I think it's well publicized, is that the CBDs have become massively more relevant again, right? And so that's whether it's Soma in San Francisco or a dozen eclectic neighborhoods around New York, there are relevant hotspots now, and suburbia is becoming a real challenge from a real estate standpoint. So drive around the South Bay of San Francisco and look at the millions of square feet of two-story tilt-up tech campuses that are sitting largely mothballed. So I think the flourishing of services on demand help make urban life more manageable. I think that's perhaps part of why the urban's coming back. But I think the other thing is it's the hip place to be.
Jonathan, I just wanted to just elaborate a little bit on what Mark said, is that seems a little counterintuitive to me. It's like, I live in the burbs, and maybe I'd like to have a landing spot in the burbs. What are you seeing in your own portfolio?
Well, suburban, listen, it's all about where you are in the demographic cycle for all of this, right? And I guess it's 50% millennial now is our workforce. So they're getting older. You got Gen Zs next, born with a cell phone in their hand. So what you were saying, it's like, when you say traditional, I'm not thinking that right now. I'm just trying to lease my building and perform the services that I can with the operational technology that's out there so that I can take my company so people like them would like to work at my company. I mean, I'm actually coming at this as a whole different angle, but as far as locations and what will happen with the workforce, it's going to be, as it shifts, I think suburban markets will be more relevant as you maybe want to have kids, and you can't afford to live in the city if you have a family at this point. So the suburbs, Brooklyn is now as expensive as the city.
Amanda, you look like you have a rejoinder to that.
Yeah.
Well, I would agree that people are exploring outside markets, and I'm not, a broker.
Right.
I'm seeing this from the tenant side, but I do think that there's sort of two types of tenants. There's ones who purposefully are looking for the fringe, and they're looking for the fringe because they can't afford the hotbeds, or they feel like that aligns with their brand in a way that they want to be seen as rogue and sort of out on the edge, and maybe in space that's industrial. The other side of the coin, I would say, actually, place really matters. I think that people select buildings based on neighborhoods. I firmly believe that. I think lifestyle is as important to a workplace as it is when a homeowner is looking at a school district and they're picking a neighborhood based on where their kid's going to go to school. I think those fundamentals around that actually are even more important today than they were 10 years ago. So I actually, I think convenience and a lot of these different offerings can help influence, but I don't see that they're diminishing the value of placemaking that happens in certain districts, especially within New York.
Now, I want to just take a minute each to tell me what you think are going to be the most important technology impacts for building owners and tenants in the next 5 years. Okay, not the next year. That's too short a horizon for our industry. But in the next 5 years, what do you think is going to be the most important impact of technology on buildings? Mark, why don't you start?
5 years. I think 50% of the tenancy transactions for building owners in 5 years will be online. I think with that, the average high-performing building owner will see a stabilized occupancy that's at least 5% higher than it is today. And I think that all of the supply chain of other functions that go with tenancy, like design and fit out, will also become sort of as a service functions to automate and simplify, to deliver on the flexibility demand that you heard mentioned by various of the speakers today.
Robert.
Well, I'll go 5 to 7 or 8 years. I actually think that, and I agree with Jonathan, is suburb is going to be, especially around metropolitan area, due to cars that can drive themselves. So, people will be living further because they can they can commute better because less traffic with cars driving themselves. And so I actually do think that suburbs will actually explode because people want to work in the city because you make more money. But they don't want to pay the expensive rent or for where they live. So when people have kids, they do tend to move out to the suburbs. So I do think that people will live further away, but still able to work in major cities like New York City or Philly or whatever that is. So I actually do think sort of transportation, self-driving cars, that would actually move people away from the city, but still work in the city.
I have a couple. One I would say that I think is going to become a very widespread, widely discussed sustainability trend, which will impact buildings, is the Living Building Challenge. I don't think most people even know what it means or what it's about. It's like LEED on steroids. It takes health and well-being of employees and raises the bar to like an Olympian level in terms of how you operate your building in a manner that has sort of a B Corp transparency, and also really pushes the bar in terms of red list compliance, and basically makes your atmosphere clean and healthy, which today essentially no building in the world is doing.
So for me, and I'll talk about the suburbs first, the biggest single issue we're going to have in the future is parking. Because these buildings were built with 4 per 1,000, and that's not what it's going to be anymore. So it's a reapproving, refiguring out, it's traffic, and yes, when we have driverless cars and they can park this close together, you're going to be able to fit more people into these buildings.
Right.
And I think what people have to start designing is the amenities and the culture. You can create a neighborhood if you didn't have a parking lot that had 1,000 spaces, right? You can create so much more of a dynamic environment for every building if you didn't have blacktop. So that's where I think we all have to think about, especially in the suburbs, but that will lead to transportation and then the same feeling that you want around the New York City's, inner city buildings. So.
Yeah, so just to add to the transportation thing, one of the problems with that suburban infrastructure is that we've seen corporate office densities per person go from 300 square foot down to 100 square foot per person. That's a 3x occupancy rate, and we're now using those buildings harder so that the actual performance rate is even denser than that, and you just don't have enough people that live in the area that could get to the building, that could park a vehicle, that could occupy it at that density. So none of the pieces work for really successful semi-urban environments in the suburbs. So that's going to be a lot of things that need to change. But to answer your initial question, I think the value of design is going to go way up, because you're going to have people who know the difference between a great environment and a mediocre environment because they're exposed to so many more of them. And to Amanda's point with Living Building Challenge or WELL, your people are going to come in and they're going to expect that the building makes them feel better over the course of the day. You need more oxygen, you need more sunlight, you need more energy, you need more exercise. That is going to become an expectation, just like now we have an expectation of, LEED Gold or something like this. And then I think the final piece there in this 5 years is that in 5 years, Gen Z is going to be walking in our front door. They are post-millennials, and we're not even serving millennials yet properly. So I think we've got some big work to do in the next few years.
In my own opinion, I think in 5 to 10 years, every workplace will be a co-working workplace. I think virtual reality will destroy commuting. And I'd like to thank our panel for a fantastic discussion. We just touched on a couple of things, but they're available for questions afterwards. So thanks again, folks.
Thank you.